Welcome everyone to this virtual session organized by Mazars, during which we will discuss how the Chinese customers' priorities in lifestyle consumption have shifted from material goods towards more experimental spending during the pandemic. I am Isabelle Massa, partner in Mazars, France, and global head of consumer at Mazars. And I'm joined by my fellow partner, Julie Laulusa, a member of our group executive board, partner in our office in Shanghai, and managing partner of Mazars in China. During this session, Julie will present the findings of a report that we published recently on this topic, which is Chinese consumer in 2021, how priorities in lifestyle consumption are changing. Based on this survey, the research that you can find on Mazars.com shows how Chinese are more and more focusing on experience rather than buying material goods. This publication has been made in partnership with Accor, Bulgari, Maserati, Rémy Cointreau, and the Chinese media Noblesse. It gives the lifestyle preferences among men, women across generation, and also the city type, and reveals how trend will define the Chinese market. It also reveals what are the new opportunities and challenges that are going to raise in the next future. You can ask questions during the session in the chat box that you have on the right side of your screen here on the chatter, and you open the chatter and you put your question here, and I will take the question at the end of Julie's presentation to ask her your question for you. But Julie, first I turn it over to you to present the study findings and explain to us how Chinese consumers are doing this big shift during the pandemic and afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle. So, welcome to all of you who are connecting online. Good morning or good afternoon. So, as Isabelle mentioned, we have prepare a survey which are related to the consumption of the Chinese consumers, especially after the pandemic. So welcome to this webinar, which is related to having to being how the China consumers are shifting their lifestyle priorities. So this is a report of 6 months of making. And for this survey, we would like to understand how the pandemic has affected the consumers' habit and especially the consumers' behavior when making the lifestyle consumption. So, and then before that we get into the key finding, I just would like to, explain the background and especially maybe to highlight the particularities of the Chinese market. The Chinese market is a very unique and fast-changing market. In 2021, when we are all facing the challenge of the pandemic, China economy has grew by 8.1%, and this growth is the largest jump since 2011. The level of urbanization is steadily increasing, especially in the Tier 1 and new Tier 1 cities. The product life cycle in China, the product life is shortened because up to 70% of the new product cannot survive no more than 18 months. And China, it's a very complex and multiple market. It's complex market due to the different generation, gender, and cities that we are going to look at that in detail. later on. There are various profile of consumers, and they have grown up in a very different stage of China's economy and social development. And finally, the Chinese consumers are becoming more mature and sophisticated, especially for those they live in first-tier cities. So what we would like to understand is the pandemic's impact on the consumer's behavior and concept of value. We know that the pandemic has changed our way of life and forced us toward more digitalization. That is a worldwide, situation. But what we would like to understand is how deep the pandemic has impacted the value and behavior of the consumers of all generations in China. Why the pandemic impact, whether it's a temporary impact or a permanent impact, and what will be the market trend in the short and medium terms. Before we getting into the report, I would like to explain why we divided those respondents into four age groups, because we believe that the consumption behavior is closely linked to the history, cultural, economic development, and also the social revolution, as well as the education of the consumers, education level. In order to better understand, the consumers' behavior of each groups, so we have divided our survey in four age groups. The first one is baby boomers. They are between 55 to 73 years old. And the second group is the Generation X. They are between 39 to 54 years old. And then millennials, aged between 25 to 38 years old. And the last one is Generation Z, aged under 24 years old. So we have collected data in Q2 of 2021, and we have received 4,078 valid responses. Our survey, we focus our survey in the following four aspects. The first one is the Chinese consumers' lifestyle consumption of the past year, which means in 2021, and what are the change in lifestyle consumption since the pandemic, and the expected lifestyle consumption in the next 2 years, and lastly, the ideal lifestyle in the future. So we have partnership this survey with a few luxury brands. So they are Accor Group, Bulgari, Maserati, Rémy Cointreau, and a strategic media partner, Noblesse. So what are the key findings? 75% of the respondents stated that the pandemic has influenced on their lifestyle consumption. 37 of them said they have increased their spending, and 38% decreased their spending. For those who have increased their spending, the top three are, the number one is the experience, all related to experience consumption. The number two is wellness consumption, and the number three is luxury goods. For those who have decreased their spending, they said that the number one is related to overseas travel, which is very well understandable. And the second one is perfume and cosmetic. And the last one, for which they have decreased their spending, is they are the live performance. So over the past year, which means that over the past year of 2021, the top 5 spending area for Chinese consumers of all generations are, the number 1 is experience, which means that travel, food, and nightlife. The second expenses are related to wellness, which means all activities related to fitness and psychological well-being. And the number 3 spending are related to luxury goods, which are clothes, shoes, hats, jewelry, watch, and electronic products. The number 4 is education, which means further education, including educational program. And the last one is related to entertainment and cultural life, which means reading or visiting museum, concert, or attending the fashion events. And what are the impact of pandemic on the Chinese consumers' consumption behavior and value concept? We found out that education has taken over luxury goods to become the 3rd most popular expense of the Chinese consumers. And entertainment and cultural life, the number 4, luxury goods fall to the 5th place, which means that the pandemic has a certain impact, and especially they have redefined the priority of the spending of the Chinese consumers. But more importantly, our survey reveals that the Chinese consumers are moving from material to spiritual consumption. I think this is the most important finding in our survey, because we know that we have the idea that the Chinese consumers, they are very material spending. In fact, they are after the pandemic moving step by step from material to spiritual consumption. And from this slide, I'm going to get into more detail of each category of spending. So we talk about the experiential consumption. This experiential consumption was the number 1 in the past year, and it will remain the number 1 spending for the next coming 2 years and for the future as well. And we found out that Generation X, they are the most important spenders in travel. Millennium spend the most on a single trip. Millennium, especially female, they are the most important spenders in fine dining. And Gen Z, the younger generation, especially male, they spend the most in nightlife. What is interesting to note is that, the most important spending in nightlife is in the 2nd and 3rd tier cities compared to the new 1st tier cities. And regarding wellness consumption just, is just behind the experiential consumption, is the number 2 in the past year. It will remain the number 2 in the next 2 years and in the future. And we found that millennium and Gen Z, especially male, they are the most important spenders in sport clubs. For baby boomers and Generation X, especially in the 2nd tier cities, they have the most important expenses in wellness are related to traditional Chinese medicine treatment. And for millennium, especially female in the first cities, they are the most important spenders in beauty services. And the younger generation, Gen Z, especially female in the second tier cities, they are the most important spenders in slimming services. And regarding luxury goods rank number 3rd. They will fall to number 5th in the next 2 years and also in the coming future. Before the pandemic, the top 5 of the luxury goods spending are, especially related to personal goods, which are clothes, hat, shoes, perfume, cosmetic, bag and leather goods, jewelry, watch, and also electronic product. And we found out that after the COVID, after the pandemic, electronic product replaced perfume and cosmetic to become the most important personal expense, and perfume and cosmetic fall to the number 5th. However, what is interesting to note is that in the future, all generation considers that their most important expense in luxury goods consumption will be related to jewelry and watch. So regarding education consumption, it ranked number 4 and it will take the 3rd place in the coming 2 years and in the future. So since the pandemic, the consumers show stronger desire for education, especially for Gen Z and millennials, especially women in the 2nd tier and 3rd tier cities. However, if we dig into much more detail in every single generation, we will find different spending which are related to education. For example, for baby boomers, they are, related to taste development. They will spend, they will make some spending related to training and for the taste development. And Generation X is to develop their personal hobby. Millennium are related to vocational skill or further education. And for the younger generation, Gen Z, for which they are under 24 years old, they spend the most in foreign languages learning. So the number 5th is related to entertainment and cultural life. It ranked number 5th in the past year in 2021, and it will take the place of number 4 in the coming 2 years and in the future. So in terms of the definition of entertainment and cultural life, for baby boomers and millennium, they are the most important spenders in film and live performance. Baby boomers and Generation X, they spend the most in cultural exhibition. Gen Z, and especially male of Gen Z, they are interested in visiting the internet famous landmarks. And for the Gen Z and millennium, especially women, they are interested in fashion events. And what about the ideal lifestyle? The Chinese consumers are very optimistic about the future. 58% of them, they stated that it will take, within about 3 years to get their ideal lifestyle. And those are baby boomers, Generation X, especially women in the first and new first-tier cities. And 38% of them said that that would take them about 4 to 10 years to realize their ideal lifestyle. And those population are Gen Z and millennial. And only 4% thinks that it will take more than 10 years to realize their ideal lifestyle. What about the amount that they are willing to spend to get their ideal lifestyle per year? So 49% of them would spend between 10,000 to 50,000 RMB in order to have an ideal lifestyle, and those are mainly Gen Z. And 33% of them would spend over 50,000 to have, to get an ideal lifestyle, and those are millennium, especially women in the first-tier cities. And 16% of them would spend less than 10,000 in order to get an ideal lifestyle. So what are the key takeaways of this survey? I would say that firstly, the Chinese market is not a unique market, but multiple consumers and diverse lifestyle market. Most of the brand, they should understand the different driver of each group and diversities and diversify, their offering. The second takeaway is the rise of the experiential over the material. The Chinese consumers are spending more and more on experiential than material. So the consumer's perception on the spending is maturing, and that it's maturing toward more spiritual well-being. The third takeaway is the wellness market is flourishing. The wellness is the second largest lifestyle expenditure. We estimate that this trend will continue and become permanent in China. The number 4 takeaway is the high demand of immersive experience. Consumers, they are becoming more and more demanding of immersive shopping, whether it's online or offline. And every touch point between the consumers and the brand is worth considering to customize the targeted population. And finally, the future is Gen Z, because this population, they have a very different consumption behavior compared to older age group. Companies will need to build an appealing brand image with this generation to attract them. Well, that's all the insight or key takeaway of this survey.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Very interesting. Before I take the questions from the audience, I would like you to precise something for me. We had published like 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago, a first publication on Chinese consumption. We have this new publication this year, and they all refer to these 4 groups of people that you've mentioned. Can you give me the big characteristic of each of this group, which would help to understand really the trends and summarize who they are actually?
Sure. I think that you are right, because one of the Chinese particularity is extraordinary economy development during the past 40 years. And for example, the urbanization rate has tripled during the same period. This social evolution, create a generation, an important, I would say, and very important and significant generation gap, which affect, which reflected in the Chinese consumers' behavior. So in China, we have four very different generation of consumers. If we go into each of them, for example, we have the first one, baby boomers. They are over 55 years old. This population, they grew up in a very centrally planned economy, and they witnessed the step-by-step development of the Chinese economy. So they are very careful, about their spending, and their primary interests are cultural entertainment. When you look at the second generation, Generation X, between 39 to 55 years old, they grew up when China began its reform and opening up policies. So they are much more educated than those, baby boomers. And they are also one of the luxury products consumers. However, their most important spending is traveling. And for millennials between 25 to 38 years old, they grew up in a very rapid development of Chinese economy. So they are much more open-minded because most of them, or part of them, they have studied in overseas. They are very well informed about the brands and brand story. And they are the pillar of luxury brands consumers. Why? Because they would like to show through this purchasing of luxury goods their success and their status. So, and for the last one, the last generation, Gen Z, they are under 24 years old. It's a generation that they grew up in a growing Chinese economy. They only seen very strong economic growth. So, and the second one is they born with the internet, they do everything online. And it's also a population that they are very conscious of the corporate social responsibility. So that's, they are very different, I would say. And whatever they buy, whatever they consume, they have different objectives.
I had shut down my mic. Taking the first question from the audience. The first one is, China has an aging population. So what do you think would be the impact of this phenomenon on the tendency of on the trends of consumption?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question from the audience, because I will say that today, 1 in 5 Chinese is over 60 years old. If we look at the future, around 2036, around 30% of the Chinese population, which means 420 million Chinese, will be over 60 years old. So you see that it's an extremely important market segment. So what are the particularities of those senior citizens? They are much more independent compared to their predecessors, and they are keen to protect their privacy. And so they accept the idea of living in a nursing house or living by themselves, which was not the case for their predecessors, because they prefer to live with their children. And the second characteristic is these senior citizens, they have a good saving. So they can, they are comfortable to spend in quality product, but as I mentioned, their primary interest is in cultural entertainment, traveling, and also learning to cultivate their hobbies. And which means that this segment or this population prefer experiential rather than tangible consumption.
Okay, the next one is the Chinese government has announced that prosperity, common prosperity, is a goal for everyone. What is the impact of this goal on the consumption and notably on the luxury consumption, if any?
Yeah, I mean, this is also a very good question, because the common prosperity, when the Chinese government announced it, it was a bit scary for the brands, because what is exactly the common prosperity? So I would say that the common prosperity would have two impacts. The one is short-term and long-term impact. The first short-term impact, since the announcement of this common prosperity, we found out that the Chinese consumers, especially for those who are the pillars of the luxury consumers, they become much more discreet. They are less eager to display their wealth and their success or social status. It does not mean that they do not consume anymore the luxury products, but they become, in their purchasing or the daily life, they are much more, discreet than before. In the long term, I would say that what is the exactly definition of common prosperity? It does not mean that the wealth is equally sharing between rich and poor, but it's rather to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, which means that the Chinese government is announcing that they will redistribute the wealth of the country among those Chinese population in two ways. The first one is to increase the tax on the wealthy people, and the second way is to increase the salary of the working class, which means to create much more or a larger middle class and to increase the purchasing power of the Chinese people. In fact, in a much more long-term perspective.
Thank you. As the Gen Z is at the very beginning of their career, but there will be a very key consumer for the next future. How do they compare to other generations in terms of spending, luxury spending, and what are the strategies that the companies should adopt to influence their trend of consumption?
Right. Gen Z is the future of luxury goods. And I would say that, as we mentioned, they grew up in a very steady and strong growth of the Chinese economy. So they are very confident in their future. This population will present around 15% of the Chinese population, but they count for 45% of the Chinese luxury consumers goods, 45%. And if we look at this generation, firstly, as we said, they are born with internet, they are native, digital, so they do everything online. They will buy things or products without seeing or touching those products because they are very well informed of the product or the brand. The second thing about this population is they buy the luxury goods to reward themselves. You see, for example, the Generation X, they will buy those luxury products because they would like to make some gift. And the millennium is to show their success and status. For those, for Gen Z, they buy it because they would like to reward themselves. And the third one is, you know, when they choose a brand, they are not attractive by the brand awareness, but rather by the design of this brand, or because they love the design. So they have very low brand loyalty. It's a population, they have a very low brand loyalty. But it's also a population that they have very strong sense of social responsibility, which differed quite importantly to older generation. Regarding the strategy that the brand or the companies that should put in place, I would invite the audience, you know, to refer to the Mazars report that we have prepared. It's called Conscious, Collaborative, Connected, Making Over the Luxury Business Model. In this report, we give a lot of insight and we explore a lot of important opportunity for the industry. For example, how to take advantage of the technology, or we have introduced, you know, the life cycle services and recycling services. We have also talked about, you know, in this report, how to form a partnership to build up an innovative ecosystem, etc. So I would invite the audience, you know, who are interested in that report, really to connect with us or to send an email that we can send them the report, we can share with them.
Thank you for the sizing of our latest publication on luxury goods. So I have 3 last questions, so I don't know if we can manage the 3 of them. But the first one is, how do the last generation about sustainability impact the Chinese consumers?
Well, at the moment, I mean, as among all the consumers generation, Gen Z, they are much more, you know, keen about the sustainability than the others. So at the moment, I think it's a definition that is emerging in China. And you see, for example, in Europe, we have a lot of, we start to have a lot of regulation and law related to sustainability development in China at the moment. It's not mandatory to disclose whatever sustainability or whatever carbon, you know, emission or whatever. I think that it will become a very important future subject in the future, but at the moment it's still an emerging subject. I think that this emerging subject is, you know, it's much more related because, you know, they care about the generation, the young generation, the Gen Z. However, it's not the mainstream, I would say.
Okay. And you mentioned that the Chinese consumer are more and more on experiences. How do the technological and online business interfering with that global trend?
Well, it's true that, you know, the Chinese consumers are very online, and the online trend, I mean, it's a mainstream. because we have all the digital platform. We have the e-commerce, we have the live streaming, we have the social media. They are all influencing our daily life. So what are the, I think among all those, you know, live streaming, e-commerce or whatever, what are the decisive factors that make people who shopping online to making purchasing online? What are the decisive factors? Because I would like to share some finding, because in our previous report or survey, we have explored this question, and we found out that the decisive factors are, firstly, when you make the online shopping, the decisive factors are whether the brand story is clear and appealing, whether the picture and the quality of the picture or the picture are nice, whether, you know, the purchasing process is very smooth, and whether the reply is very timely, whether it is a services of 24 hours and 7 days per week. These factors, timely reply, is especially very important for the Gen Z. And whether, you know, what is the delivery time, whether is it acceptable, and can the consumers return the goods? You know, all these are very important factors that when Chinese consumers they are visiting or they are shopping online, those are the factors that making them shopping to buy. And I would like to, you know, to remind our audience that the technology is evolving very quickly. You know, there's we have a lot of clients, Isabelle, you know that with the arrival of Internet 3.0, especially metaverse, this new technology will, you know, offer a lot of possibilities, which include visual, oral, smell, touch, and taste, and etc., which will profoundly, you know, change the way that consumers and brands are interacting with each other. So I think it's very important that for brands and for companies to really to be aware about this possibility of the new technology. I think it will be a key factors, important factors.
Thank you, Julie. I still have some questions arriving, but we are 2 minutes from the end of this conference. So we will answer to you in writing or directly. So please keep on sending your questions. We will revert to you later after this conference or have a direct contact if needed. The only thing I would like to do before we close this meeting is, of course, thanking Julie for her very clear report, to invite you to go to Mazars.com, where I guess we've mentioned at least 3 reports that we've published recently in the last 2 years. Please go there, look at that. There are many, much material in there. And as a summary, maybe if I should wrap up this session, I would say first, China is a very complex market. It's really complicated. We have all sorts of people. One of the questions is about, do you buy for yourself or do you buy for other people, and etc. And it's also very complicated because social life is complicated. So we shall deal with it as foreigners. Second thing is, it's clear we have a gap between the 4 generations. They're very marked, whereas in Europe, it might be a little more linear with less differences between generations. In China, the gap is really important and very formalized. The third one is, well, after all, COVID reshuffled the consumption. It reshuffled everything. And even though traditional China is still there. You're moving more and more, not to material goods, but to experiences. And that's a very strong trend that goes over the 4th generation. And that's very interesting. The 4th takeaway is immersive experience on and off is really important, and it really impacted. So if you as a brand want to enter the Chinese market, you'd better have a very good website, a very good front line for your internet and for the immersive experience that the client will want to have. And the 4th one is technology is changing all the sectors. Chinese people are very technological, very tech-oriented, let's say, and this is a prerequisite for everything. And I guess that's my takeaway. So you might have others, but that's how I understand it. And we will be very, very happy to discuss with you. So do not hesitate. We will send you our data, Julie's and mine. So if you want to have a chat with us, do not hesitate to call us, and we will be very, very glad to get back to the conclusions of this report and discuss with you what it means maybe for you and your company. Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you all for your time this morning or this afternoon, I don't know. And enjoy your day. Goodbye to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabelle. Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.